Hello everyone. I hope you're doing well and staying safe. My name is Aditya Taude. My team number is 10 and today I'm going to present the case CSR Reputation and Firm Performance, a Dynamic Approach. Engaging in corporate social activities is a means by which firms comply with accepted societal rules and exhibit appropriate business behavior. CS regulations are government policies that involve social issues such as human rights, minorities, or environment, where firms are required to achieve a minimum standard of compliance. Government can monitor this compliance in various ways, for instance, requiring self-reports by the firms, conducting audits, or issuing penalties for non-compliance. A way through which firms can differentiate themselves is by going above and beyond government regulations and thereby developing CSR reputation for themselves over time. This paper hypothesizes that there is a correlation between CSR reputation and a firm's performance. In this case study, we argue that changes in a firm's compliance with CS regulations are reflected in its reputation for corporate social responsibility, which affects the firm's performance. While determining performance impacts, we have taken into consideration the following biases: recency bias, negativity bias, and foreign bias. Also, our hypothesis is not just theoretical, but tested through empirical analysis of the US banking industry. Before moving to our hypothesis, let us have a look at some essential terminology. A firm may have any one of the three CSR reputations based on compliance with the CS regulations of the government. First of all, negative or non-compliant, that is, the firm fails to comply with CSR regulations. Neutral or compliant, that is, the firm meets CSR regulations. And positive or above compliant, that is, the firm exceeds CSR regulations of the government. While determining performance impacts, we have taken into consideration the following biases exhibited by decision makers or stakeholders. Negativity bias, which weights negative CSR reputation more heavily than neutral or positive. Recency bias, which weights the present CSR reputation more heavily than the past. And foreign bias, that is, foreign firms suffer unfamiliarity, discrimination, and relational hazards, which negatively affect their performance and CSR reputation. This paper tests 9 hypotheses that are grouped under 3 categories. The first category is losing or gaining a negative CSR reputation. We start by examining the directional impacts of gaining or losing a negative CSR reputation, that is, moving between compliance and non-compliance with CS regulations. Hypothesis 1A states that losing a negative CSR reputation does not affect firm performance. Since a neutral CSR reputation is easy to replicate by other firms and not necessarily a valuable intangible resource, the firm is unlikely to derive superior performance in the current period from mere compliance with government CS regulations. Hypothesis 1B states that gaining a negative CSR reputation negatively affects firm performance. Having a negative CSR reputation can significantly damage a firm's relational ties and sustainability. Without a reservoir of goodwill from prior CS activity, stakeholders are likely to stigmatize and shun a firm that gains a negative CSR reputation. In sum, gaining a negative CSR reputation is costly for the focal firm due to strained or detached relationships with current stakeholders and the inability to attract new stakeholders. Hypothesis 1C states that the impact on firm performance of losing a negative CSR reputation is smaller in absolute terms than the impact of gaining a negative CSR reputation. This hypothesis is derived by combining hypothesis 1A and 1B and looking at them in terms of their absolute values. The second category is gaining or losing a positive CSR reputation. In this category, we examine the directional impacts of gaining or losing a positive CSR reputation, that is, moving between meeting and exceeding CS regulations. Hypothesis 2A states that gaining a positive CSR reputation positively affects firm performance. Gaining a positive CSR reputation implies that the firm has moved from meeting to exceeding government CS regulations. Stakeholders place more emphasis on the achievement of social responsiveness because it is difficult to replicate a valuable intangible resource that can be a source of competitive advantage. Thus, the overall impact of gaining a positive CSR reputation has a positive effect on firm performance. Hypothesis 2B states that losing a positive CSR reputation does not affect firm performance. Although losing a positive CSR reputation is a negative change, the firm's CS activities have declined from exceeding to meeting CS regulatory requirements. The firm currently does not distinguish itself from its peers and does not achieve superior returns. Since the firm is not non-compliant either in current period or recent former periods, negativity bias does not affect the firm much. A firm with a favorable track record for CS activity that curtails its CS activity to the minimum required by the law is likely to receive the benefit of the doubt from stakeholders. Hypothesis 2C states that the impact on firm performance of gaining a positive CSR reputation is larger in absolute terms than the impact of losing a positive CSR reputation. This hypothesis is derived by combining hypothesis 2A and 2B and looking at them in absolute value terms. The third category is gaining or losing a negative CSR reputation versus gaining or losing a positive CSR reputation. This category is more complex than the first two because we argue that there are three effects involved in looking at CSR reputation in a dynamic context: the firm's current and past levels of CS mandated activity, recency bias, and negativity bias. Hypothesis 3A states that the impact on firm performance of losing a negative CSR reputation is smaller in absolute terms than the impact of gaining a positive CSR reputation. This hypothesis is called as moving up the ladder in CSR reputation. If one conceptualizes a firm's CS mandated activity level as moving in steps from first non-compliance to compliance and then compliance to above compliance with CS regulations, we predict the impact of the second step should be positive and larger than the first step in absolute terms. Hypothesis 3B states that the impact on firm performance of losing a positive CSR reputation is larger in absolute terms than the impact of gaining a negative CSR reputation. This hypothesis is called as moving down the ladder in CSR reputation. If we conceptualize this as moving down the ladder, the first step down from the top, that is above compliant to compliant, in absolute terms should have a smaller effect on firm performance than the second step, that is compliant to non-compliant. Hypothesis 3C states that the impact on firm performance of gaining a negative CSR reputation is larger in absolute terms than the impact of gaining a positive CSR reputation. In this hypothesis, we compare moves away from neutrality. Here we are comparing the impact on firm performance in absolute terms of hypothesis 1B, that is moving away from neutrality to above compliance, with hypothesis 2A, that is moving away from neutrality to non-compliance. Although recency bias suggests that exceeding CS regulations will produce goodwill with stakeholders, Recency bias coupled with negativity bias suggests that stakeholders will weigh a recent negative outcome more heavily than a recent positive one. Empirical analysis. Our paper tests its hypothesis on data from the US banking industry. Extensive government regulations in this industry make the relationship between firm compliance with government regulations and firm performance particularly relevant. Because going above compliance with government regulations is one way a firm can differentiate itself from its peers. Also, the bank's CRA ratings used are based on independent assessments by federal government agencies. Their CS activity levels can be considered credible and reliable, unlike self-reports of CS activities. The dependent variable used in the analysis of this paper is firm performance as return on assets ROA, which is the most commonly used measure of bank performance in research management. The independent variables in this analysis capture positive and negative changes in a bank's CS mandated activity levels. Results. Table 3 shows us the comparison between predicted hypothesis and the corresponding results of empirical analysis. In most cases, the actual impact on firm performance supports the predicted impact on firm performance. In the case of hypothesis H3A, the absolute value of the coefficient for losing a negative CSR reputation is not statistically different from the absolute value of the coefficient for gaining a positive CSR reputation, implying that no empirical support exists for hypothesis H3A. Thus, the size in absolute terms of the two upward steps in terms of their correlation with firm performance is roughly the same, so that their difference is not significant. In the case of hypothesis H3C, which we refer to as moving away from a neutral CSR reputation, stated that gaining a negative CSR reputation should have a stronger effect on performance than gaining a positive CSR reputation. But empirically, our results show no statistical difference between the size of these two steps in absolute terms. From the results of the analysis, the following conclusions can be drawn. Stakeholders asymmetrically weigh a firm's positive or negative changes and current non-current corporate social activities. Gaining a positive CSR reputation underscores a firm's social commitment and enhances its supply of goodwill for CS activity. Losing a negative CSR reputation involves recollection of negativity in the prior period. Firms with a neutral CSR reputation are legitimate but do not achieve superior returns. Gaining a negative CSR reputation negatively affected a firm's performance, and gaining a positive CSR reputation positively affected a firm's performance. Movements toward compliance with CS regulations had no significant impact. Losing a negative CSR reputation, that is moving from non-compliance to compliance, and losing a positive CSR reputation, that is moving from above compliance to compliance, were both non-significant. Moving down the ladder, that is, from above compliance to compliance in period 1 and in period 2 from compliance to non-compliance, cost the firm more in absolute terms than moving up the ladder, that is, moving from non-compliance to compliance in period 1 and in period 2 from compliance to above compliance. Results confirm the impact of negativity, recency, and foreign biases on a firm's CSR reputation and its corresponding performance. Increasing CSR activities in Canadian firms to boost their performance. Our case study has made evident that there is a significant correlation between a firm's CSR reputation and its performance. Implementing CSR activities that not just are in line with government regulations, but exceed expectations will help Canadian companies improve their reputation in order to maintain a healthy relationship with current stakeholders and attracting new ones. Canadian firms in foreign host countries should get involved with CSR activities that are valued by the local community in order to lessen the effects of foreign bias affecting their CSR reputation and thereby performance. Professional help from associations like Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, CBSR, must be taken to channel resources in initiatives relevant to the firm. Regular audits by an external organization must be conducted to ensure that CSR activities are in line with set goals and that internal CSR audits are not exaggerated, which in turn can potentially tarnish firm image. In order to achieve a distinguished competitive advantage over other firms, a Canadian company must diversify its CSR initiatives over time, keeping them relevant to current concerns, both at a local and global level. Performing risk analysis and measuring CSR outcome to determine which CSR activities are profitable and need more focus is also essential. One such Canadian company that has not just thrived on its CSR activities, but has been brought into existence because of a social cause is She Native. Founder and CEO Devon Fiddler lived through racism, stereotypes, family violence, and incarceration. After years of aimlessness and hopelessness, when Devon finished her university degree, she was inspired to build a fashion lifestyle brand filled with light, inspiring thousands of Indigenous women and gaining professional success along the way. Canadian Indigenous women face systemic barriers and challenges. She Native is committed to employing Indigenous women in designing and manufacturing of their goods, giving 2% of revenues towards causes that positively impact the lives of Indigenous women, and many more empowering activities. This concludes my presentation. I would like to thank you, Professor, for providing me this opportunity to analyze this case study and to present it. Thank you.